Good evening, everybody, and welcome in. I know I'm doing something a little bit different this evening, so just bear with me 1 second while I get some stuff sorted, including my blanket reserve, because that is in my way. Well, not really in my way, but all right. Cool. Oh, sorry about that. Oh, pretty. Okay, where was I? Sorry, we are doing something a little bit different this evening, so bear with me just a second. Okay. Welcome in, Archives family. I'm so glad you're all here this evening. Fixing. Yeah. Oh, lighting is a bit crazy. 1 sec. Technical difficulties. Okay. Alrighty. Yeah, lighting's a bit funky this evening. I apologize. There we go. A little better. Okay. Hey, Wraith. Thanks for that 3-stream watch streak. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Alright, here we go. Yes. Welcome in to our Wednesday evening stream. Tonight we're doing something a little bit different, but still very on brand for this channel. We're going to talk about the creative process, specifically how to come up with a story idea, how to take that idea and build an outline, and we're going to walk through all of that using my very own story, Train Your Daughter, as the framework. For anybody who's new, my name is Meshla. I am the keeper of the Galactic Archives, and I've been living in this universe for, well, longer than I want to admit on stream. Long enough that these characters in my head have an opinion about my sleep schedule, which is a little concerning. The focus tonight is going to be on process, not just lore. So yes, I'll talk about Jarius, Marin, Ethan, Stefan, Jared, all the usual suspects, but the real point is to show you how I get from I have a cool idea to a structured story that you can actually start writing. Here are some expectations for the next few hours. We're going to move in phases, much like waypoints on a patrol. We'll start with where the ideas come from, turning that idea into a rough outline, deepening that outline with character choices and emotional arcs, and then translating that outline into scenes and pages. We'll use Train Your Daughter as an example at every stage. And of course, as always, questions are welcome in chat. And if I missed your question, please feel free to repost it. I will pause at several points to do question and answer, but I will also try to keep an eye on chat as well. Give me 1 second. I get some water. Okay. So, grab your caf, your tea, or even your water and settle in. And we'll get started with phase 1, where the story begins, before there are even words on the page. I know, it's... it was really interesting coming up with this, to really sit down and break down how I write, because it really does start with a spark for me. Alright. Let's first start about where stories actually come from. at least for me. It might be different for all of you. I don't usually start with a full plot, let's be honest. Sometimes I wish I did, but it's really interesting to start with just a little tiny idea, a spark, a grain, whatever you want to call it. It's important to have a starting idea. I usually start with a combination of things like a character that's in a difficult position, an emotional question, or one or two images that won't leave me alone. For instance, the origin story for Ethan. That's been kicking around in my brain since I was working on Age of Darkness, which is still in progress. So that's been kicking around a bit. For Train Your Daughter, the seed or the spark that I started with looked something like this. A Mandalorian raised kid who is too sharp for her own good, living on the streets of Corellia. A former Katani Marine, Darius Durza, who has already lost too much and does not consider himself father material. And the question, what happens if a man who's already grieving chooses to take responsibility for a child who could very easily become a weapon or a casualty if no one steps in? That's what I like to call the emotional spine. Before I knew the chapter count or even the scenes, I knew a few things. Darius finds her. He chooses not to turn her into the authorities. He gives her a choice, but it's not really a safe or even an easy choice. And from that moment, both of their lives changed direction. I also had a second core question. What does it mean to be worthy of a blade? Not just in terms of physical skill, but in terms of character. That question shows up again and again around Marin's Mandalorian heritage, Darius' past as a Marine, Ethan's role as a mentor and a warrior, and later, Stefan and the Jedi at the Praxium. So if you're trying to come up with a story, one of the simplest starting frameworks is, who is at risk of becoming someone they don't want to be? I mean, that's a question we fight with too. Who steps into their life at that moment? And what hard questions sit between them? You don't even have a full plot yet. You just need that pressure point. For Train Your Daughter, my pressure point was, this kid had been surviving on her own. She's angry, wary, and already learning the wrong lessons from the galaxy. Darius has every reason to walk away. He's already paid his dues, lost his wife, and he knows exactly how ugly things can get. But he doesn't walk away. He takes her in, and that decision has consequences throughout the story. From there, I started collecting small images or sparks and moments in my head. Marin trying to steal from Darius on the Tricinia. Darius handing her a datapad and telling her to write. The first time seeing Katani Marines in full armor and uniform. That moment years later when she sees Stefan's lightsaber and realizes that this is not just a weapon. It's a symbol. I want you to notice something. None of what I just said is a chapter outline. It's all emotional logic and character moment. So if you're stuck at the, how do I come up with a story stage, try this. Pick one character. What are they afraid of becoming? What do they most want to protect? Put them in a situation where they have to make a choice about those things. Decide who else is in the room or the scene with them, who challenges that choice, and who witnesses. That's your spark. The plot comes later. In Train Your Daughter, the spark is, a grieving Marine sees a young street rat heading down a path he knows far too well, and he makes the decision to pull her out of it, knowing that it may break him even further. Everything else grows from there. For anybody who's in chat, do you already have a character like that in your head? Do you have a character in your mind that just won't leave you alone? I know I do. More than one. It's hard to keep them in check sometimes. But I suppose that's a sign of a good writer. Alright. I have several characters like that in my head. Okay. Lies, lies, and slander. I know this about you, Wraith. I have many characters who live rent-free in my head. Some of them weren't even mine to begin with, okay? For instance, Darius, Ethan, Jared, Stefan. They were not originally mine. And yet, Ethan, Jared, and Greer, most recently, are the ones that live rent-free in my head. Well, Marin too, but yes. Those three in particular are rent-free in my head. Okay. So you know what I'm dealing with here. Alrighty. Once I have that emotional seed, I don't jump straight into chapter 1. That's where a lot of people burn out. They get really excited. They write 1 or 2 chapters, and then they realize they don't actually know where the story is even going or where they want it to go. So the next step for me is making a skeleton. Think of it like marking positions on a map before you start moving units. For Train Your Daughter, the initial skeleton looked something like this. Very high level. Act 1, The Choice, on Corellia. Jarius meets Marin. She tries to steal from him. He sees what she's becoming and what the system will do to her, and he chooses to take her in. Act 2. This is roughly from when she's 5 to when she's about 12. Learning under Jarius and Ethan. Life aboard the Tricenia and on Tanagas 5. Early Mandalorian and Marine-style training in discipline, survival, and ethics. Marin is starting to build her own internal code. Ethan enters the story as another stabilizing presence and trainer. Act 3, The Praxium and the Blade. Darius brings Marin to the Praxium. She doesn't want to be there at first. She feels like it's taking her away from the life she understands. Then she sees how Stefan and the others treat the Blade, with reverence, and she realizes there's another path to being worthy of a weapon. She meets Jared. And then later, the student ambush happens, and Jared makes a silent vow to protect her. Yes, there's some spoilers in here, I'm sorry. Spoiler warning for those who have not been around when I was reading Train Your Daughter. There's some spoiler territory in here. Sorry. Not sorry. Act 4. The Cost. Jarius' death and Marin's next step. Jarius' past catches up with him. Marin loses him near the end of the story. She has to stand on her own, shaped by everything he and others have taught her. The story closes with her stepping forward into her path as both a Mandalorian and a Jedi in training. I want you to notice a few things about this. I don't have scene numbers yet. I'm not worried about exact ages in every moment. I'm marking turning points. Her adoption, her training, her time at the Praxium, Jared's vow, and Jarius' death. If you're outlining your own story, a good rule of thumb for me, if you can't summarize your story in 4 major turning points, you don't know it well enough yet. You don't have to get it perfect on the first try. You just need a working map that says, we start here. We pass through these 3 or 4 critical crossroads, and we end here with the character changed. So let's line those up with the emotional questions from Phase 1. The adoption on Corellia answers the question, will Jarius walk away? The years of training with Jarius and Ethan answer the question, can this kid be taught a healthier code than the one the streets gave her? The Praxium and Stefan's Blade ask, is she willing to step into a set of expectations she doesn't fully understand yet? Jared's vow and the ambush answer the question, will anyone stand with her when the rest of the system turns on? Jarius' death asks and answers, what remains when the person who pulled you out of the fire is gone? This is how I use Train Your Daughter as a framework, not just as a collection of chapters, but as a series of questions and answers about these characters. So when I say that I start with an outline, I mean I start with something like this: 4 main acts, a handful of non-negotiable turning points, the emotional question each turn is supposed to answer. From there, we can start breaking things down into smaller, more detailed beats. That's where we're going next. If you had to name your 4 turning points right now for your own story, what would those be? Think about that for a minute. Keep in mind that I actually spent a lot of time rewriting and expanding Train Your Daughter over the last several months. I've actually been working on that project for, well, not Train Your Daughter specifically, but kind of across her whole arc, is expanding Marin's stories and adding to her arc. It originally started out with, I think, 4 stories. It's now like 7 or 8, maybe more than that. But in the process of reworking and expanding Train Your Daughter and the next story called To Honor the Departed, it really got me thinking about some of those really important people in Marin's life. And how did they come to be the people that they are when she meets them? How did Ethan become who he is? Outside of what we know of Jarius, how did he become the person that he is when Marin meets him? And how, and through Train Your Daughter, we actually get to explore how his meeting Marin changes him as a person, which is, it's a really interesting thing for me to explore, because it, environment, people's experiences, and the people that they meet, they can change who you are as a person, and hopefully that's for the better. So that's kind of the thing that we're exploring as we work through this, specifically looking at Train Your Daughter. These are the questions we're trying to answer. Now let's move on to phase 3, where we'll look at deepening our outline using character logic and emotional thread. We started with a simple skeleton, and now we're going to start looking at what I like to think of as the muscle and connective tissue of the story, the character logic. An outline isn't just this happens, and then explosions. If I'm doing it right, every beat in the outline answers 2 questions. What does this character believe right now? And how does this scene either challenge or reinforce that belief? Let's walk through a few key pieces of Train Your Daughter and how I deepened the outline that I used to write the story. 1. Why does Jarius actually take her in? On the surface, the outline says he finds a street kid, he adopts her, but that's not enough. So in the outline, I start adding the internal notes. Jarius recognizes certain patterns in Marin, things he's seen in Marines who went bad or in kids who didn't make it. He remembers losing his wife and the fact that no one could undo that for him. He's carrying guilt from his own past actions and his own choices. Taking Marin in is partly an act of atonement, but it's also a very practical, very Marine decision. If I leave her here, I know how this ends. I'm not going to let that happen on my watch. So in the outline, that early section goes from Jarius adopts Marin to something more like Jarius sees her try to steal from him. He recognizes the survival pattern. He remembers his wife's death and the cost of hesitating. At the last moment, instead of turning her in, he gives her a choice. Come with him and learn, or stay and take her chances. He fully expects her to run, but she doesn't. Those internal notes never show up word for word on the page, but they shape how I write the scene. And if any of you have read even parts of the expanded version of Train Your Daughter, you'll see that. If you compare it to the original version of the story, which was written when I was in high school, to the version that's there now, there's a lot more depth. Okay. And 2. Marin from age 5 to 12. She's learning under Jarius and Ethan. Also, we have an ad starting in about 3 minutes and 35 seconds. The skeleton of our story says, years of training with Jarius and Ethan. Deepening this outline means I ask things like, what does Marin believe at age 5? How does that belief change by the time she's 12? At the start of her story, she believes that the galaxy is fundamentally unsafe, which is true. Adults are dangerous or unreliable, which is also true in her case. Survival is up to her, and her alone. No one else is going to help her. By age 12, she still believes that the galaxy is dangerous. That part is accurate. But she's starting to trust that some adults will hold the line. She's internalized a Marine and Mandalorian's sense of discipline. You show up, you keep your word, you protect the people under your care. So in the outline, instead of vaguely saying training montage, I note key beats. Jerry is giving her the datapad journal and telling her to write in it. She doesn't even know how. He realizes this and loads her datapad with lessons. Ethan showing her how to break down and reassemble a weapon safely, and making sure she understands the why behind every step. Small moments of failure where she loses her temper or breaks a rule and the consequences are very real, but they're about teaching, not cruelty. These become anchor scenes later when I'm actually drafting. 3. The Praxium, from I don't want this to I will prove myself to be worthy. This is honestly one of my favorite parts of the outline and the story itself. At first, Marin's reaction is very human. You're taking me somewhere I don't know. You're putting me under another authority I didn't ask for. I'm going to lose what's familiar. How many of you have felt that way when you've gone somewhere new or met somebody you didn't know before? I mean, I felt like that. I feel like that a lot at a new job. I'm sure a lot of you do. The outline notes, she resents being sent to the Praxium. She feels like she's being sent away. She assumes that this place will treat her like the system did on Corellia. So what changes? Stefan's blade. In the outline, it went something like this. Oh, seriously. Yeah, pretty much. That is a great example, Wraith. That is an excellent example. In the outline, I write something like this. Marin sees Stefan practicing with a boken, not as a threat, but as focus. She watches how others react to that blade. It isn't just a weapon, it represents duty, discipline, and a different kind of power. She decides if that's what the blade stands for, I will prove myself worthy of it. That moment flips her motivation. Before, she said, I don't want to be here. But after she sees Stefan, she says, or she thinks, if this is the standard, I'm going to meet it, and you're not going to regret bringing me here. Outlining these moments means that when I'm drafting, I know exactly why she changes direction. I'm going to stop right there because we have an ad starting in about 5 seconds. See you in a minute and a half, my friend. All right, my friends, we are back from our ad break. Thanks so much for hanging out. I appreciate you. All right. And 4. Jared's vow after the student ambush. The student ambush is actually a pretty major waypoint in her story. At the high level, it's other students attack Marin. Jared witnesses this and intervenes, and afterward, he quietly vows to protect her. But to deepen it, I can add things like Jared already knows something about her background. He's noticed hints that the system isn't treating her fairly. The ambush isn't just roughhousing, it's targeted, vicious, and it crosses a moral line. Jared has his own history with violence and with leadership gone wrong. That's another side story that I want to write. Watching her stand back up anyway and still try to do the right thing, it crystallizes something in him. So his outline note becomes, after the ambush, Jared understands that if no one chooses to stand between Marin and the worst parts of the system, she could break, or harden in all the wrong ways. He makes a silent vow to protect her. No fanfare, no big speech, just a decision that shapes everything he does afterward. This is important because it means that when I'm writing later stories and he's trailing her through the forest or watching her back in a fight, it's not random. It all tracks back to that one choice. This is what I mean by deepening the outline. I still have my 4 big acts of the story, but now with those acts I have key beats driven by beliefs, fears, and choices, not just by the events of the story. If you're outlining your own story, you can ask yourself, at each major waypoint, what does my character believe about themselves and the world around them? What happens in this scene that forces them to reinforce or challenge that belief? And what quiet decisions are they making that will echo later, even if they never say them out loud? Once I've got that in place, I'm finally ready to start talking about how this turns into actual chapters and scenes. I take some water. Oh. Actually, yeah, I have. Uh, let's see. Alright, Wraith. You asked, have you ever had your original idea morph into something completely new? Whether due to realizing that the concept had been done to death, or someone presents a fresh idea. Yeah, actually. I actually did a lot of that while I was reworking Train Your Daughter. It, like I said, it was one of the stories that I wrote while I was in high school. And you can tell in the writing style that it's very, it can be really abrupt in places, and there isn't a lot of, there's some exposition, but not to the level that I like. And originally she's with Jarius and training with Jarius and Ethan for not even a year before she goes to the Praxium. It's like 8 months or something. And I felt like that was really unrealistic. I mean, yeah, it's possible, but for the scope of the story, and the place that she was at, I didn't feel like that quick of a timeline really did her story justice. And so I sat down and I thought about the things that, like, the types of training that she would undergo, and some of it had been touched on in the original story, but a lot of what she learned from Jarius was by observation. For instance, when she first, after she first met him and he gave her the choice to come with him or stay on Corellia, I mean, he didn't tell her, oh, well, you have to do things this way. He just kind of was like, well, here, I want you to help me. I want you to do this. And he didn't hover. He didn't try to shove her out of the way. He gave her a task and expected her to do it, not realizing that she couldn't read. And she hadn't had any formal education. So that actually backtracked things quite a bit. He had to help her learn how to read. It started kind of high level at first, but kind of how we were talking about high level overview of the outline. It started kind of the same way. He thought that she could start at a certain point, and he realized as he'd loaded the data pad with lessons that she really didn't understand how to read. So he had to start very gradual, and it helped. And he started tying in what he was having her do with what the words that she was learning. And she started kind of copying the things that he was doing, like how he folded his blanket, how he kept the galley clean. These are things that she just started doing and kind of copying from him because it's just how he was. And she felt, I don't know, what is the word? She felt, I don't know if like she felt, maybe she did feel like she was being disrespectful of his space. So she started kind of copying the way that he did things, like how he cleaned and how he organized things and how he folded his blanket, that kind of thing. And it really started to help her kind of take ownership of the space and the things that she was given. And he had her do various tasks. And at first he didn't really give her instructions because he thought she understood. And she didn't really break anything, but the console was yelling at her, so she got all upset and thought that she was going to get in trouble, because that's what usually happened. And so for Jarius, he had to really kind of reevaluate how he was kind of interacting with her. And it really changed. It really did. It really changed their whole dynamic. And I think that, and I definitely feel like it was for the better. So I really feel like taking the time to revisit her original story and really kind of dig down into that, I think that was really important to explore not only how Marin was kind of forging her own identity, but also how she was learning how to interact with him and other people. Just any interactions she'd had with people in the past really hadn't ended very well. Okay. Did you have a follow-up question there, Reese? I'd love to continue that tangent for a minute, if you don't mind. Alrighty. Okay, that's fine. That's okay. Let me... I'm gonna find some... I'm looking for some more examples. Let's see. Okay. Let's pause here for a second and take a look at kind of a micro scene. Picture this. Marin is about 5. She's barefoot on, she's inside the ship. She's looking around kind of frantically because she knows he's there and she's trying to figure out how to get away. So she's barefoot. Her eyes are frantically tracking the exit. She's breathing tightly because she already knows the sound of trouble. She can hear him coming. This is the girl that Jarius sees when she tries to steal from him. What do you think or feel that Jarius saw in her the moment she tried to steal from him? What do you think her posture or her expression? I mean, those are the kind of things that I really try to think about when I'm working on these scenes. Is because you really want to breathe life into them. Okay. Does anybody here in chat have a character who started with a hard choice like that? I mean, I didn't really intend for Marin's story to start that way, but it just kind of happened. And for those of you who are writing, did you start with a character idea or with a plot idea? Because you can start from either point, but I personally find it easier to start from a character or a spark. All right. Actually, I'm gonna go find something real quick for that example. Alrighty. I'm gonna look up an example for you, actually. For what we were just talking through. Hi. Sometimes that's the best starting point. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm looking for something. Looking at something real quick. Oh, thanks. One second. There we go. I was looking up a scene for a second. Alrighty. Let's move on to phase 4, from outline to pages, scenes, flexibility, and even discovery. So far, we've got a story seed, a 4-part skeleton, deeper character-driven beats. Now, let's talk about how that becomes actual pages. This is where I often start with a more detailed pass. I break each act into scenes or clusters. I decide which moments happen on camera and which are implied. I sketch a rough chapter list and accept that it will evolve as I draft. Case in point, the rework of Train Your Daughter. Let's use Act 1 from Train Your Daughter as an example. The high-level note was, Darius finds Marin on Corellia and chooses to take her in. That can easily be broken down into several scenes. Scene 1, Marin on the streets, showing how she survives, what she's willing to do, and where her limits are. Scene 2, her first encounter with Darius. Maybe she targets him somehow. Scene 3, the failed theft and confrontation. Scene 4, Darius' internal struggle. Does he walk away, turn her in, or pull her out? Scene 5, the offer, the choice, and the departure. Do I have to write all 5 as full scenes? Not necessarily. That's where I make decisions like, do we need to see an extended street sequence, or can we imply it with one tight scene? Do we intercut Darius' internal conflict, or let it show in his body language and dialogue later? Let's be honest, I did a little bit of both. And you'll see that if you go and read the updated version of Train Your Daughter. The outline becomes a tool for choosing what to show. It's not a rigid checklist. Once I've done that for each act, I sketch a rough chapter list. For example, the early section of Train Your Daughter might look something like this. Chapter 1, Marin on the streets with her first theft attempt. Chapter 2, Darius confronts her, sees something in her, and doesn't turn her in. Chapter 3, the offer and departure aboard the Tricinia. Chapter 4, the first days under Darius' rules. An introduction to a different kind of structure. This isn't actually the exact format that I used, but it's pretty close. I'll do the same for the later acts. A cluster of chapters around her life from 5 to 12 with Jarius and Ethan. Another cluster around her arrival at the Praxium and seeing Stefan's blade. A smaller, more intense cluster around the student ambush and Jared's vow, and the things that happened before and after. And a final cluster leading up to and following Jarius' death. Again, none of this is written in stone, but it gives me a path forward. It's important to leave room for discovery. Sometimes while I'm drafting, a side character becomes more important than I expected. Case in point, Ethan and Jared. A quiet moment between two people lands harder than one of the big scenes. Yeah, that happened a few times too. Or I realize that a scene I planned no longer serves the emotional arc. Yeah, that happened too. Several times. When that happens, I go back to the outline and I adjust it. The outline isn't my commanding officer, and it isn't written in stone. It's more like a map with known hazards and landmarks. In Train Your Daughter, that kind of discovery might look like this. Realizing that a small, quiet scene of Jarius handing Marin her datapad journal deserves a whole chapter, because it defines how she processes the Galaxy from then on. That actually happened. Or deciding to give their arrival at the Praxium more emotional weight instead of treating it as a quick transition, because that's where she first sees Stefan's blade and redefines worthiness. That's kind of a whole mini arc, actually, because he first takes her to the Praxium, I think when she's like 9, but they don't go in. They just kind of look at the outside, and she doesn't really want to go in, and so they leave. And then they come back. Like, she decides later that she wants to go back. So if you're outlining your own story, don't be afraid to do any or all of the following. Promote a small outline note to a full scene if it carries emotional weight. Collapse 2 planned scenes into one if they're doing the same job. Rewrite your chapter list mid-draft when the story teaches you something about itself. That has happened. Again, case in point. Reworking Train Your Daughter. It went from 30 very short chapters to 46 long chapters. The outline's job isn't to hold you in place. It's to keep you from getting lost when your energy is low or real life hits hard, which for some of us can happen often. It'll let you pick up the story again and know, right, this is the next waypoint. Alright. I did want to spend a little bit of time kind of sharing a scene from the reworked version of Train Your Daughter. So you can kind of see how I kind of applied all of that. So I'm gonna read you guys a little bit. There's actually a couple of scenes in here. This is a really long chapter. Okay. There we go. We have an ad starting in about 3.5 minutes. So I'm gonna read a couple of scenes from the first chapter of Train Your Daughter. This one's called Flight and Fracture. Marin blinked against the sudden light, her eyes wide and unshielded. Her breath caught in her throat as she stared up into the face of the man whose ship she had broken into, weathered, armored, and terrifyingly still. His eyes were sharp and cold, but not cruel. Not yet, at least. Her heart thundered in her ears. She didn't give him a chance to speak. With a strangled gasp, she sprang forward. Her hands clutched the small vibro knife she'd stolen weeks ago from a market stall, its edge dulled and pitted, its hilt wrapped in torn cloth. It was a child's last weapon, useless against a man like him. She knew it. Still, she ran, bolted out of the compartment like a wild animal loosed from a snare. Her bare feet slapped the deck grating, her breath ragged, her eyes searching frantically for another exit. Behind her, the man didn't shoot. Shout, he didn't curse. He moved. Fast. Darius blinked once in surprise as the girl tore past him, the panel swinging on its hinges. A child? He thought. A child snuck aboard? For a moment, the thought held him still, and then instinct kicked in. He chased her with the smooth, practiced stride of a hunter, not a burst of fury, but a closing vice. Her footsteps were erratic and frantic. He had already predicted the turn she'd take at the next junction before she reached it. She didn't get far. He caught her by the arm just past the hold entrance. She spun, snarling like a feral thing, her eyes wild with terror. Her blade came up, floppy form, but all heart, swinging as hard as she could toward the joint of his armor. The vibro knife struck his chest plate and snapped. The brittle blade shattered against his Beskar gown with a dull crack, splinters of metal scattering across the deck. Before she could swing again, he batted the hilt from her hand with a gloved swipe and stepped in close, grabbing her shoulders. She struggled, knees lashing, teeth bared, but he was stronger, heavier, and trained. And I'm going to pause right there because we're about to have an ad. Be right back. Alright, my friends, we are back from our ad break. Thanks so much for hanging out. Let me get back to that scene for you. In a heartbeat, he had her pinned to the deck, gently but firmly. She thrashed in his grip, breath hitching in fury and fear, tears stinging her eyes as she struggled not to cry. I said, he growled, "You're not very good at hiding." She went still. His voice was like gravel, not cruel, not mocking, just matter of fact. And that was somehow worse. Her whole body trembled, her chest rising and falling as she glared up at him with all the defiance she could muster. "I didn't steal anything," she spat. "I just needed food." He looked at her. Really looked. Filthy tunic, bruised wrists, hollow cheeks, the shape of old bruises on her collarbone, half hidden under the grime. He eased his grip and then knelt back on his heels. "Get up," he said, quieter now. "You're not in trouble." She didn't believe him, but she got up anyway. The quiet between. She stood slowly, arms tight at her sides, the broken handle of her knife still lying on the deck where he'd knocked it away. He didn't reach for it. He didn't reach for her, either. He just knelt there, still as stone, watching. Marin kept her back pressed against the bulkhead, her eyes fixed on him. Her breath was shallow, her ribs ached, her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She didn't know if she was more afraid he'd hurt her, or afraid because he hadn't. Why hadn't he? Her mind scrambled for answers. Men like him didn't show restraint. Not in the alleys, not in the orphanage, not when you were small and alone and disposable. Her shoulder throbbed where he'd grabbed her, but it hadn't been cruel, just controlled. Why? Why didn't he hurt her? Why didn't he hurt me? She stared at the armor. It wasn't new. It wasn't polished. Not for show. It had been repaired. By hand. More than once. Burn scoring on the van braces. Knife gouges on the side plates. Faded sigils she didn't recognize. And that helmet he'd worn earlier. T-shaped visor. Blank otherwise. Like the old stories. The kind whispered by the older kids in the dormitory when the lights were out. Mandalorian, they'd said. Raiders. Pillars. No faces. No mercy. And yet, he hadn't said much. Just a few words. But his voice didn't carry malice, not pity either. "You're not very good at hiding." That wasn't a threat. It was a statement. A truth. She hated how true it was. Her fingers flexed. She wanted to run again, but her legs wouldn't move. Not from fear this time, but confusion. He should have dragged her outside, should have thrown her to the port authorities, called her thief, slapped her across the face like the dock foreman had when she tried to pocket a protein stick months ago. But he hadn't. He hadn't even raised his voice. She didn't know what to do with that. He stood, not fast, not looming, just standing there. He turned his back to her, walked a few steps toward the galley and paused. "You coming?" he asked, not turning his head. It wasn't a command, just a question. She stared at him, stunned, still tense, still braced for the hit that hadn't come. Her lips parted. Nothing came out. Then, after a long moment, she followed. Just a few steps behind, just far enough to run again, but not so far that she was alone. The measure of a child. She followed, quietly, light-footed, her eyes sharp, constantly flicking from wall to hatch to his back. He didn't have to look to know she was still holding her breath. Darius keyed on the galley lights and moved with methodical ease. He didn't speak again. Not yet, anyway. Instead, he pulled out another ration bar, protein-heavy, bland, the kind meant for long missions, and set it on the table. He didn't offer it, just placed it down, neutral, letting her choose. He busied himself with a small water unit, filling 2 mugs and setting one beside the bar. And then he sat. And only then did he look at her. She hadn't moved. She didn't trust it, didn't trust him. Smart kid. But she was standing. He could see it now, the slight tremor in her knees, the gaunt cheeks, the dirt-caked fingernails. She hadn't eaten properly in days, maybe longer. And yet she'd try to fight him, not cry, not beg. Fight. His eyes narrowed slightly. Most kids that age broke fast when cornered, but this one? She bit like a half-starved pathhound and aimed for the throat. It wasn't just fear that made her run. It was instinct. And instinct didn't lie. She wasn't just some street orphan who got lucky breaking into the wrong ship. He studied her movements, the way she kept her back to the bulkhead, how she watched the room first, not the food, how she stood close enough to bolt, but far enough to gauge his reach. Clever, desperate, dangerous if someone were to teach her how to use it. He leaned back, his mug in hand, and took a long sip. She didn't flinch at the sound. Good, but she didn't relax either. She reminded him for a moment of someone else. No, he exhaled through his nose and dismissed the thought. That part of his life was buried with ashes and bone. Still, he looked at the girl again. "You know how to hotwire a hatch," he said flatly. She blinked at him. Her jaw tensed. "But you didn't wreck the panel. You traced the circuit instead of frying it. That means you think before you act." He paused and then added, "Most of the time." A flicker of something crossed her face. Suspicion. And then something else. "You're not stupid," he said. "And that's dangerous." There was another pause. "I don't kill kids, and I don't turn in survivors." He said it plainly as if it cost him nothing. But it did. The space between. She hadn't moved. Not for the water, not for the ration bar. Darius said nothing more. He just sat, forearms resting loosely on the table, his gaze fixed somewhere past her shoulder, not quite looking at her, but never unaware. The silence stretched between them like taut wire. He could feel her weighing every variable, the position of the door, the distance between them, the layout of the room, which she'd already memorized the second she entered. She wanted to trust the food. She couldn't. Not yet. He didn't blame her. He remembered that feeling, not the hunger. He could barely remember what it meant to starve, but the other thing. That low-grade hum in your chest that said nothing was safe, that nothing ever had been. Not your home, not the people who claimed to care, not the system, not even the quiet, especially not the quiet. He saw it in her eyes, that sharp, watchful anger barely held behind the fear, and he knew that kind of anger didn't come from nowhere. It came from being left behind. Too many times. Her fingers twitched at her side, and then stilled again. She was still watching him, still ready to bolt, but she hadn't run. Not yet. That mattered. He took another sip from the mug. It wasn't fast, it wasn't slow. It was just steady. He made no sudden moves, he asked no questions. Not yet. He didn't need to fill the silence. She'd talk when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Either way, he'd know what kind of person she was soon enough. He'd been trained to read patterns in movement, tension in a stance. He'd studied the breathing of wounded prey through a scope, the way a cornered man faked left when his pulse always gave him away. The girl was a study in quiet resistance, and she hadn't given up yet. That, more than anything, told him what he needed to know. All right. I'm gonna read a little bit more. Eventually, her gaze dropped to the ration bar. Her eyes narrowed, and then slowly she stepped forward. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't even say thank you. She picked it up like she was stealing it, again, and backed away before she tore the wrapper open with her teeth and bit down hard. Only after she'd finished half of it did her posture change. Slightly. He saw it in the way her shoulders dropped. Not fully, but enough to say, I lived. I'm still here. He said nothing, but he let her eat in silence. A name given. She ate like someone who hadn't been allowed to enjoy food in a long time, half-starved but controlled, each bite fast but cautious, like it might be taken away. Darius didn't interrupt. He simply watched, quiet and still. The girl hadn't sat down. She stood a few paces away, pressed to the bulkhead like she still expected to be kicked out any second. Or worse, she was braced for it, even after the food, after the silence, even after the Shoto stayed sheathed at his side. She didn't ask why he hadn't thrown her out, didn't ask where he was taking her, didn't ask what he was going to do. He could see it in her, questions building behind her eyes, but no words coming out. Because words were dangerous, because needing anything was dangerous. He understood. He remembered what that silence felt like, so he broke it. Quietly, not to demand, not to corner, just to offer. My name's Jarius. He didn't look at her when he said it, just stated it like a fact. A quiet thing dropped into the stillness of the galley. A name, a seed. It was something to hold on to, something to throw away if she needed to. He didn't ask for hers. He didn't expect her to give it. He just took another sip of his water and leaned back in his chair, as if it didn't matter either way. As if the world wouldn't turn on whether or not a half-starved, angry little girl wanted to speak. But part of him hoped she would. Just once. Oh, that is a great question. Because honestly, I've kind of felt that way a few times with Marin. Um, what is my process when I feel that a character is stuck and I'm not sure where to take them next? Um, hmm. Give me 1 second. Yeah, that's a tough one because I have definitely been there. Okay. Ooh. So here's something that I do when I feel like a character is stuck. First, you don't want to try and brute force a scene, let alone a chapter. Okay, I fall back on 4 steps. And these work. Step 1, return to the character's core wound or emotional drive. Every time Marin stalls, every time Jared goes quiet, every time Ethan locks down, I go back to the root question of who they are. I ask, what are they afraid of right now? What are they trying to protect? What do they believe about themselves in this moment? This ties actually back into the things that we were talking about earlier. No. I don't push the plot forward until I know the emotional truth behind those questions. I re-anchor the character by placing them in a small, grounded moment. I don't escalate, I narrow the focus, or narrow the field. Things like Marin tying her braid or touching Jairus' tags. She does this frequently, actually. Running her thumb over Jairus' tags is something she does when she's nervous or uncertain about something. It could also be things like Jared doing quiet weapons maintenance. Could even be on her weapons. Or Ethan stepping back into disciplined stillness. Greer running a mental inventory or gear check. And I have actually done small one-off scenes to kind of explore these. These small moments can tell you several things. What your character might be thinking, what they're carrying emotionally, and what they might be avoiding. From that, our next action becomes obvious. I ask, what is the honest consequence of the last scene? This can be one of your strongest instincts. When stuck, don't try to invent a new plot. You look back at what you already have and you ask, what would a real person feel or do after what just happened? My stories move because I follow emotional causality, not convenience. For example, after the ambush at the Praxium, the honest next step was Jared's silent vow. After Collier, Marin's next was stillness, recovery, numbness, not immediately leaping back into action. Wow, words. After Korriban, the honest next beat was fear, distrust in her own strength, and silence. This is how I find the next step, by following the character's truth, not by forcing forward movement. And 4. If the character is still stuck, you change the environment, not the character. This is a pattern I've seen across all of my arcs. I don't change who they are, I change where they are. For instance, I've tried moving Marin from the forest to the ship, moved Jared from the Praxium halls to the clearing on Tanagas, moving Ethan from the battlefield to the quiet of the workshop, moving Greer from the perimeter to the command tent. And when the environment shifts, pressure shifts, sensory details shift, and priorities shift. And the next action usually naturally presents itself. So to put this a little bit more simply, when a character stalls, don't try to force them forward. Listen to what they're telling you. Return to their emotional core as a character. Ground them in a small, human, tactile moment. Ask what the honest consequences of the previous scene is, and then shift your environment until the next choice reveals itself. This allows your characters to move with internal consistency. I don't try to shove the character forward. I try to walk with them until their next step becomes clear. I hope that helped, Wraith. I really do. I felt a little disjointed, but I hope that did help. It's actually something that I've had to think about a lot with Marin's story in particular. Because as I've been reworking it, I've been really thinking about that emotional weight, and how that can kind of flavor the scenes around it. It's you did actually. Think about that for a second. Yeah, I had to think about that for a bit. If you like, I can toss you my notes on that. So. Alright. So that's the process that I tend to use when I get stuck. The 4 steps that I just outlined above keep me from forcing a plot beat that isn't earned, and they keep my character arcs consistent. This is why Marin's journey feels cohesive even across multiple arcs, because every step she takes is anchored in emotional truth, consequences, and environment, not plot convenience. If you If you have a character who feels stuck, which of these 4 steps might help you unlock their next move? Emotional core, a small moment, the consequences, or an environment shift? Take your time, think about it, and then drop it in chat. Oh, righty. We have an ad starting in just under 5 minutes. Yeah. Well, and with the character, if you're talking about the character that I think you are, yeah, he's gone through some pretty major character development and environment shifts, and really like what he believes. Yeah. um, I'm really trying to not get into spoiler territory. But yeah, there's some pretty major shifts. So yeah, actually, this might help you, Wraith. How to listen when a character goes silent. Let's add one more layer to the 4 things that we just talked about. Because sometimes when a character gets stuck, it's not that they don't know what they want, it's that we're asking the wrong question. Characters don't go silent for no reason. They go silent when I'm trying to push them into a scene they're not ready for, or one that doesn't belong to them. So when a character refuses to move, I ask, whose scene is this really? Sometimes I think I'm supposed to follow Marin, but the next beat actually belongs to Ethan, or to Greer, or to Jared, or even to the environment itself. Scene shifts when the point of view shifts. What emotional state are they refusing to show? Jared, for example, will go quiet the moment I try to write him expressing something too directly. Marin will go silent if the emotion is too raw. Ethan will go silent if I'm pushing him into melodrama instead of disciplined honesty. Silence is a signal. It means I'm trying to skip something they'd never skip. What truth is the character avoiding? This is usually the key. If Marin won't move, it's because she's avoiding the things she thinks will hurt her. If Jared won't move, it's because he knows the next step costs him something. If Ethan won't move, it's because the line between care and pain is too thin. When I figure out what they're trying not to face, the next beat often becomes obvious. What does the reader need right now? Sometimes the character is stuck because I'm giving the reader the wrong information. The character won't move because the story rhythm needs space, such as a pause, a quiet beat, a shift in sensory details, or a moment for the reader to breathe. I try really hard to add those in when I can. That's when I slide the character somewhere else and let the environment speak first. So when a character goes silent, I treat it as a tactical intel, not a failure. They're telling me. You're not asking the right questions yet. And the moment I find the right question, the character starts moving again. We have an ad starting in about 42 seconds. So I'm gonna just chill out for a little bit. I have a micro scene demonstration about what I just talked about if you're curious, but I'll do that after our ad break. I mean, that works too. That actually is pretty valid. Revi is your comic relief. We have an ad starting in 7 seconds, my friends. So I will see you guys in a minute and a half. Go get yourself some water. I need some. Alright, and we are back from our ad break, and I have a micro scene of sorts. I run these periodically when I'm feeling stuck, which that does happen occasionally, or when I'm trying to kind of work through something and it's not really gelling. So this is a micro scene that doesn't really tie to anything in any particular story. It's just a demonstration. It's a micro scene for demonstration purposes, and it focuses on Jared. So this follows the process of emotional core, small moment, consequence, environmental shift. Praxium, outer training hall, night. The hallway is empty. Training blades are racked in their places, the lights are low. The stone floor is cooling with the evening air. Jared doesn't move at first. He stands near the archway, his hands braced against the frame as if the stone itself is holding him upright. He hasn't spoken since the ambush ended. He's angry, but the anger isn't new. What's new is the sharp, sick sting of watching someone cross a line he's seen crossed before, back on Gorse, in the shadow of things he can't forget. What's new was the way it hit him when Marin didn't fall apart. She just stood there, breathing through the pain, refusing to give them the satisfaction. He hated how familiar it feels. So, he strips his gloves off slowly, methodically, holding them once, twice, the way Stefan taught them. His hands are trembling, barely visible in the dim light. He presses his thumb to the emitter shroud of his lightsaber, not igniting it, just feeling the ridges. It grounds him. Jared always grounds himself through maintenance. He tries to walk away. He really does. The honest next step should be to report to an instructor, follow procedure, let the system handle it. But he knows the system won't. Not fast enough. Not thoroughly. Not in the way she deserves. And the truth is simple. He can't watch another person get dragged under by cruelty just as training. He lived through that once. He won't stand by and witness it again. And here's our environment shift. Jared steps out of the shadowed hall and into the light of the training circle. The stones are scarred from generations of drills. The air smells faintly of dust and metal. It's a place where choices are made. He stands there for a long time. Then, quietly, almost too quietly to count as speaking, he sets his gloves beside him on the stone and straightens. The vow isn't spoken. It doesn't have to be. It settles into his shoulders, into the steadiness of his stance, into the way he turns toward the corridor where Marin has been taken to recover. It's a Marine instinct, a Jedi instinct, and something older than either. He will not let her stand alone again, not while he is still breathing. And with that decision made, Jared finally moves. Not because the plot finally demands it, because the moment demanded it of him. Actually, yeah, that's actually... That was a scene that I was kind of scaffolding while I was trying to figure out how and when he made that vow. Because the moment where he makes the vow isn't actually referenced in Train Your Daughter, it's referenced later. So I had to really... That was a scene that I kind of used as a framework for when it's discussed later. And it really kind of works through the 4 stages, and I think that it's a really good way to kind of see how it kind of plays out. I have another one. This is another micro scene exercise that I did focusing on Ethan. Because Ethan is Ethan and he doesn't leave me alone. Yeah. So this may parallel existing scenes because I was using it as an exercise to kind of really see where the character was going to go next. So this micro scene is focusing on Ethan. Praxium. External walkways, pre-dawn. The sky above Catan is still dark, just the thin grayscale before sunrise, the mountains sketched into the horizon. The air is cold enough to sting the lungs. Ethan stands alone on the external walkway, his boots planted on stone warmed only by memory and discipline. He has been here since before the bell. He hasn't moved. And here is your emotional core. Ethan doesn't freeze often. Years of Mandalorian discipline beat hesitation out of him early. But right now, he doesn't know what to say to Marin. Not after the way she flinched yesterday. Just a flicker, barely visible, but enough that he recognized the shadow behind it. The same shadow he once carried through the forests of Galvis, through the dust of Skira, through the barrack hallways where silence was safer than breath. He knows this kind of hurt, and he knows how easily it can shape a young warrior the wrong way. That's why he's here. To think, to choose, to not fail her. He takes a slow breath, unclipping the vambrace from his left forearm and examining the interior lining. A pointless gesture because nothing is wrong with it. But the ritual calms him, resets his mind, and forces the nerves to quiet. He relatches the vambrace with precision, tight enough to hold, not tight enough to restrict movement. He doesn't fidget. He maintains. He could go to her now, knock on her door, say something reassuring. That's the instinct most people would expect from him. But the honest consequence of yesterday's moment is this. If he speaks now, he risks pushing her too far. He risks making her choose between hiding in the fear or admitting it out loud, and she's not ready for either one. Ethan remembers what it was like when someone asked too often, or too soon, when admitting pain felt like opening a wound that hadn't healed. So he waits, not out of indecision, out of respect. He lets the consequences settle, and he lets her breathe. The first trace of gold touches the mountains. It's enough. He steps away from the railing and walks toward the inner courtyard. Slow, steady, the controlled stride of a man who has marched across more worlds than he cares to count. He chooses a different environment because she needs it. Not confrontation, not questions. Training. Neutral ground. A predictable routine. Something that offers structure instead of pressure. He enters the courtyard and begins setting up a quiet, familiar drill. Not combat heavy, not punishing. A kata meant for breath, balance, and grounding, when Jerry's used to run her through on the Tricinia. He doesn't call her. He doesn't send for her. He simply starts moving through the forms, slowly and deliberately. An invitation, not a command. If she needs him, she'll know where to find him. If she needs distance, he'll hold the space. Either way, the path forward is here when she's ready. That's how Ethan moves when he's stuck. He doesn't force motion. He creates steadiness until the next step reveals itself. Alright. Oh goodness, it's already... Oh my goodness, it's already at 45. So what happens when I'm having fun, my friend? Alright. So I hope that those those micro scenes helped a little bit. They are not scenes that are actually like in the stories, but they echo scenes that are, because it was an exercise that I used to help me get the flow of those particular scenes. So I really hope that those were helpful to you, because I have found that to be useful. Alright. If you want, I think I have one more. I do have one more scene if you guys are interested. This is interesting because it's something that I did when I was really trying to kind of get into Greer's head. Because military writing is not something that I'm very skilled with. So I had to do a lot of reading and kind of get myself into that headspace. So this micro scene here focuses on Greer, and it kind of mirrors some scenes that happen actually in the Drunken Well arc, but it's not an actual scene. It's just an exercise that I was doing. Druckenwell, perimeter line 0400 hours. The night is cold, the kind that sinks through armor seams and breathes against the skin beneath. The crash site is quiet now, too quiet. Harris is posted at the tent entrance, Ral pacing a slow half circle at the perimeter. Vec is inside with Marin. Greer stands alone just beyond the halo of the portable lights, his boots planted in mud that still remembers the heat of blaster fire. He's not moving. That doesn't happen often. He's angry. Not the kind that snaps, the kind that settles low, controlled and deliberate in your chest. The kind he learned to master after Galvis. He knows exactly what was done to Marin. He recognizes the technique, the precision, the intent behind the needles in the compound. He knows how close she came to never waking. And he hates, quietly and deeply, that he wasn't there 5 minutes sooner. But anger isn't the problem. Anger is familiar. What has him stuck is the knife edge between two instincts. The instinct to hunt, and the duty to protect. He can't do both at once. Not yet. So he does what Marines do when the mind needs tightening. He checks his gear. One glove tugged tighter. The clasp to his belt inspected. The haptic nodes in his gloves reseated with a practiced thumb press. Every motion is precise, economical, and quiet. His breathing evens. His hands stop trying to curl into fists. He sets a palm against the cold plating of his helmet, letting the temperature shock him into clarity. It's a small ritual, but it has a big effect. He wants to go after the one who did this. He could. He could track them. He could follow signs no one else would notice, read the terrain like a ledger, and bring back the name that needs to be erased. But the honest consequence of Marin lying in that tent, half-conscious, poisoned, fighting her own nerves, is that she needs him here. Not out there. He can't leave. Not tonight. Not until her breathing is steady and her eyes stay open without trembling. That realization hits him harder than he expects. He shifts his weight, his jaw tight. His place is here. The hunt comes later. He steps back into the light. Just one step. Enough for Harris to see him, enough for Vec to hear the soft crunch of gravel and know command is near. The shift in environment changes the whole equation. He's no longer a shadow at the perimeter. He's now the anchor point, the quiet center of the perimeter line. Greer moves towards the tent entrance, nodding once at Harris. An unspoken, stand fast, and then pauses, listening. A single haptic pulse vibrates against his wrist from Ral on the far flank. Eyes on. Target contained. The code is soft, controlled, and professional. Good. He enters the tent only when he knows his men are settled, the perimeter is secure, and his own mind is no longer pulling him in two directions. Marin lies still, her breathing shallow but steady. Greer positions himself at her side, his shoulders squared, his voice low and steady when he finally speaks. Easy. You're safe. We've got you. It's not dramatic. It's not loud, just the simple truth of a Marine who has made his choice. The hunt can wait. Her survival cannot. Oh. You know, I had that exact problem. Mm. Yeah, that is actually something that I struggled with too. Um, for me, one of the things that I did was to kind of take it scene by scene and see if I could add some emotional weight, um, maybe add some kind of internal dialogue, what the character might be thinking or feeling. Uh, and I mean that's the the light version. Um, and that's a very important question. And I'm gonna restate it for chat. So Wraith asks, how do you add more content without losing the impact of a scene? Or make it, and how do you make it longer? Okay. Okay. Okay, here we go. So, but like I said, this is something I think about with almost every chapter or scene that I write, especially the shorter ones where an emotional beat needs to be tight and clean. So I'm gonna walk you through the process that I tend to use. There are 3 rules that I follow. Okay. Rule 1. Identify the core moment and do not touch it. Every strong scene has one central moment that everything else orbits around. Your job is to find that moment and guard it. Ask yourselves these questions. What is the emotional pivot of the scene? What line, look, choice, or silence carries the weight? If I remove everything else, what must remain for the scene to still matter? Here are some examples from my work. In Train Your Daughter, Jared's silent vow after the ambush. With something like that, you can add build-up, aftermath, atmosphere, but the vow itself stays untouched. In Steps into the Past, Marin collapsing in the medical tent. Everything else shifts around that. Once you have the heart of the scene, you can add around it, but never under it, never replacing it. Rule 2. Add context, not padding. There is a difference. This is the difference between strengthening a scene and smothering it. You can add atmosphere, sensory grounding, internal clarity, a small detail that sharpens the emotion of the moment, a character's subtle reaction, a consequence, an environment shift, pacing beats, or breath. You do not add literary filler, redundant descriptions, rephrased dialogue, extra events that don't belong in the scene or the chapter, or explanations that talk over the emotional moment. Your additions should heighten the core, not distract from it. When in doubt, ask yourself, does this added piece make the core moment shine brighter, or does it pull attention sideways? If it pulls sideways, cut it out. Rule 3. Expand the lead up and the fallout, not the moment itself. This is honestly one of my strongest points as a writer. I rarely expand the emotional center. I can expand before the moment with characterization, tension building, sensory realism, the breath before the blow, or pacing that prepares the reader. I do a lot of that, actually. After the moment, you can expand the consequence, the shock, the silence, the physical or emotional fallout, or a character reaction. Don't stretch the core impact. Let it land hard and clean. Examples of this might be Jared's vow. If I were to rewrite it, I could add more detail about the hallway, his shaking hands, The way the light falls, the sound of other students training in the distance, the cold stone beneath his gloves. But I wouldn't expand the vow itself. That moment should be small. Or, for instance, if we're looking at the next micro scene with Greer on Dreckenwell, I could add environment, a more haptic pulse communication, the smell of the tent, the sound of Harris shifting his weight, or Vex's tone if he reports aloud. But the moment Greer moves towards her, don't touch it. And here's kind of a little bonus. You can lengthen a chapter without making it bigger. You can make it deeper, not wider. When a chapter is short but emotionally heavy, the temptation is to add plot. What you actually need is to add dimension, not more events, just more depth to the events you already have. My additions always tend to be things like sensory description, the motivations for a character, an emotional anchor of some type. They're usually specific and quiet and meaningful. Some of the most impactful chapters in my stories are short. I mean, I've had chapters that are 10 or 12 pages where I think my longest chapter was like 35. Yeah. So they, and it really depends on what I'm trying to accomplish in a particular chapter. I try to have the chapters focus on like one or two main things instead of trying to do lots of things in a chapter. I try to keep each chapter focused in one or two events. Right. Wraith, I hope that was helpful for you. Sorry. It was kind of, roundabout. I hope that did help. Oh, good. Okay. Alright. It is 9 o'clock, my friends. When did that happen? Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah, the emotional fallout, especially for my stories, it's a really big piece of Marin's entire arc because she deals with that a lot. And so do some of the other characters, but maybe not to the degree that she does. So, I'm really glad that that's helpful for you. I can definitely provide you my notes if you'd like, Wraith. Happy to do so. Okay, it is 9 o'clock. As we come up on the end of stream, let's do a quick summary, and then I'll take a few last questions. We walked through a lot tonight. So, we walked through my entire process tonight using Train Your Daughter as an example. And the process looks like this. Start with a seed, or a spark, not an entire plot. A character in a difficult position, an emotional question, a couple of key images. For me, this is Jarius, a grieving ex-marine and a street-raised kid who could easily go very dark if nobody steps in. 2. Build a 4-point skeleton for the scene that I just described. We would have the beginning would be the adoption on Corellia, or the rescue on Corellia, I should say. The middle would be her years of training with Jarius and Ethan, and her arrival at the Praxium. The turning point might be the student ambush and Jared's vow. And the ending of the skeleton might be Jarius' death and Marin stepping forward on her own path. And 3. Then we deepen the outline with character logic. Why does Jarius take her in? How does Marin's belief about herself and the world change between the time she's rescued on Corellia and the time that she goes to the Praxium? What makes her decide that she wants to be worthy of the blade? And why does Jared vow to protect her after the ambush? Translate this into scenes and chapters. This is number 4. Break big acts into scene clusters. Decide what happens on camera and what's implied. Jared's vow is very much an implied scene, but it is actually described in later stories. But the story that it actually happens in, you don't actually see the scene. It's very implied. And then sketch a flexible chapter list, knowing that it will evolve. It's never set in stone. And 5, and this is most important, leave room for discovery. Adjust when certain moments hit harder than expected. Promote small beats into full scenes when they carry emotional weight. And let your outline bend in service of the story, not the other way around. That's very important to remember. And we have 36 seconds, so I may not get through all of this, but I have some homework for you. If you want some homework from tonight's stream, here it is. Pick one character of your own. Write down the emotional question at the heart of their story. Sketch 4 major turning points. Then pick one of those turning points and deepen it in a way that we did with Jairus' choice or Jared's vow. And I'm going to stop there because we have an ad in about 6 seconds. I will be right back, my friends. Go get yourself some water. Alright, my friends, we are back from that ad break. I hope you actually took the time to go get yourselves a drink of water. I definitely did. Alright. So I'm going to kind of revisit my last little bit right before we went to the ad break. So we have covered our oh my goodness. our creative process a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Words are hard. So if you want some homework from tonight, here it is. And this is only if you want to work on this. Pick one character of your own from one of your stories. Write down the emotional question at the heart of their story. And you might end up with more than one, depending on where you are in their story, but pick one. Sketch 4 major turning points in their story, and then pick one of those turning points and deepen it in a way that we did with Jerry's choice or Jared's vow. That's it. That's your starting process. You don't need a perfect 30 chapter structure before you're allowed to begin. I definitely wasn't planning to have Marin's initial story be 46 chapters. The muse would not let me stop. Okay? Before we shut down for the night, I'll take a few questions from chat about outlining, about train your daughter, or about the creative process in general. And as always, if I miss your question, feel free to drop it in the Discord later so I can circle back. I'm happy to do so. Please feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat. I'm happy to answer them as I can. And Wraith, as always, you're welcome to toss questions my way or toss them in the chat at your leisure. Alrighty. Okay. Well, for those of you who are lurking in the background, thank you for being here. You're welcome, Wraith, anytime. I'm always willing to answer questions, even if they're off the wall. You never know. I might have been in the same spot once, which is usually the case. Thank you all for spending time with me tonight and walking with me through how these stories get built behind the scenes. It may seem like a lot, but if anybody would like my notes on that, I can definitely put them in the Discord. Remember, you don't have to do it my way. This is just how I do it. It's just one framework. You can take what helps and discard what doesn't, and shape a process that works for how your brain works and for how your life is. And as always, take care of yourselves tonight. Hydrate, stretch, and get some rest. I definitely need to. The archives will be here when you come back. And as Greer would say, Kesarim, which is stand easy or rest easy, and have a good night. Take care of yourselves, and I hope you all have a blessed Thanksgiving and are able to spend time with your family and friends and loved ones. And I hope that this provided you a small pocket of calm amid the oncoming insanity, which I hope is not the case. But I do hope that you enjoyed the stream and that it provided you some calm before things get busy tomorrow. Please make sure you get some rest. Have an awesome night, you guys. I am actually going to see if we have anybody that we can go say hi to. Because I did not do that last stream. Let's take a minute and find out. You know what? We are gonna go say hi to Foxy. Foxy Nix is a fellow member of the Survivor Squad, and she plays lots of cozy games. This evening, she is playing Disney Dreamlight Valley, so we're gonna go say hi to her. And I would greatly appreciate if you guys could tag along and share the cozy vibes. And if you are subscribed to the channel, please feel free to grab the first raid message. And if you are a follower of the channel or just kind of lurking but not following and want to tag along, please feel free to grab that second message. We are going to go and say hi. Give me just a minute while I get that set up. Oh my goodness. I am being technically challenged today. Okay. Alright, guys. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope to see you all at my next stream on Sunday, where I will be back to editing and writing on my current stories. Have an awesome and relaxing day tomorrow, and please take care of yourself. Have a good night, my friends.